Welcome everyone to On Night New York City. Thank you for joining us here online or viewing the recording. Hope you all are healthy and keeping it sane with all the craziness around the world. On Night is a monthly meetup organized by augmentedreality.org, a nonprofit with a mission to advance AR to advance humanity. And we do it by bringing together the best of AR from around the world to the AR community. This month, the AR Cloud turned 3. So we are here to celebrate and investigate if it delivered on the promise. We have a brilliant panel of experts to discuss the state of the AR Cloud and answer your questions. My name is Orion Bar, founder of AWE and Super Ventures. So by joining On Nights, you actually join a global network of AR professionals that meet now in 18 cities around the world. And many operate online these days. You can actually join a lot of them. Here's how to join. You go to our website, awexr.com, select from the top left drop-down On Nights. You get a calendar with all the meetups during that week, or you can actually scroll forward, click on each one. You should get all the information you need, including how to RSVP and how to join the Zoom links, if there is anyone. And since you're now part of this incredible community, let's get social. So I always ask who's going to be the first to tweet with the hashtag OnNight New York City, especially on the AR Cloud anniversary today. To remind you, we also have the widest collection of XR videos from the past years. So if you're interested, check out our YouTube channel. There's over 2,000 videos there. And on Facebook, you can join the community. There's a lot of live streams from On-Night meetups. And as a reminder, AWE Online, which took place in May, is still available. So if you want to view over 200 of the best talks in AR and VR, feel free to get to it from our website. And that brings us to today's topic. The AR Cloud turned 3, and the question is, has it delivered on the promise? To that end, to answer this and a bunch of other questions, including your questions, we have assembled an all-star panel. Before we kick it off, the meetup is sponsored by Super Ventures, a fund dedicated to investing and advising AR and VR startups. So I want to start with a quick word about the state of AR in general as of today. So in 2020, we're seeing actually fantastic progress with AR adoption, with over 1 billion users using it mostly for social and e-commerce and games, but growing in other sectors as well. And about 1 million content creators with growing sophistication of content and platforms out there. But I think that we're just scratching the surface. I think everybody here knows that the potential is much bigger. So let me take you back for just a second to 2017, 3 years ago, when the ARKit was launched this month, 3 years ago. And it was an awesome day for AR. It really promised to give a huge boost for AR. It's also an opportunity to emphasize that this is not enough to get AR adopted by the masses. As we've seen with all big successes on the internet, it's about sharing and collaboration. So after some huddling with Matt, which was at Super Ventures at the time, and a few startups that started to innovate in this direction, I wrote this blog post, which coined the term AR Cloud, and really described what was needed and where it's going. And at the core, this was really about the need to make AR experiences persistent and shareable. And this is how I defined it back then: a scalable, shareable point cloud, an instant, ubiquitous localizer, and the ability to serve all this real time to multi-users along with interaction. Since then, the definition has evolved. We've seen many people describe it differently. Here's the definition of the OpenAR Cloud organization, which is a bit more detailed. And it says that the AR Cloud includes the creation, management, and use of persistent, dynamic, shareable, 3D machine readable representations of physical spaces and real-time services to offer AR experiences to users. In that same post, I also predicted that we could see a mature AR Cloud in 3+ years. So to keep myself honest, 3 years later, we're investigating the state of the AR Cloud. So that's the time where we introduce our awesome panel. I'm going to start with my good friend, former partner at Super Ventures, CEO and co-founder of 6D AI, which was acquired by Niantic. So he could sort of give you the perspective of both the startup world as well as a bigger company that is going in that direction. So Matt, you want to say just a few words about yourself, what you do, and how it relates to
Yeah.
the air cloud, please.
Well, I guess, Ori and I were there, at the beginning of the term, and I think, that discussion we're having, we're trying to find a way to articulate what it was that 6D-AI was trying to build, in a simple way. And so, I've been working on this problem for, before 6D-AI, and 6D was really purely trying to solve these problems to make the AR cloud possible in order to make, a new generation of AR applications possible. And the big thing for me was seeing over the last couple of years how it went from an idea or a concept through to, every single major computing platform company out there is now working on building their own version of this. So in terms of, Ori, leading the charge in sort of, communicating what it all means to the world, I think that's just ultimately succeeded in that we've seen, like, everybody now is building their own version of it and acknowledging that this is necessary and it is needed and is critically important to the future of AR. So it's been fun sort of seeing that go from, like, literally a conversation over a table in a conference room through to, seeing all these big companies start throwing, serious money at building this out.
Awesome. Plenty of questions for you, which hopefully you'll address later on. Next, we have Kavya Perlman, founder of the XR Safety Initiative and publisher of the Privacy Guidelines for XR, probably one of the top authorities on privacy and security in this domain. Kavya, tell us what you do and how it relates to the Air Cloud.
First of all, thank you, Ori. I think we were just earlier talking about how privacy gets a seat at the table. So this is something symbolic. And just by my sheer presence, you can say privacy and diversity gets a seat at the table. So thank you for making that point. I'm Kavya, and I'm the founder and CEO of XR Safety Initiative X, as Ori mentioned. At XRSI, our goal is to help build safe and inclusive immersive environments, which applies to augmented, mixed virtual reality. And past couple of years, I would say, the goal has really been to establish baseline. Where our expertise comes in, where there is literally no standards or no guidelines. We basically expertise in sort of drawing a line in the sand and then sort of eventually evolve over time into a more solid framework or standards and stuff like that. And I'll talk more about it as we go.
Fantastic. Awesome to have you with us, Kavya. Next, we have Jan-Erik Vinjet from Scandinavia, from Norway, joining us. He was the co-founder of the Open Air Cloud. Jan-Erik, tell us about yourself and how what you do relates to the Air Cloud.
Yeah, so I have a day job where actually I got the opportunity to work on a prototype that connected geospatial data in an AR experience. So we display that on the world around us, but we were doing that manually, and we understood that to do this in a great way for users, we need something that connects to a cloud representation of the world. And then Uri came along and introduced this word that really clicked, and things happened. And I tried to reach out to other people and look into how we can work together to standardize. So I was really lucky to be able to meet people in the industry who shared the same urgency that we should work together and we should make sure that we take care of privacy, security, accessibility, diversity, all of those aspects, as well as the technical. So on my free time now, I have the pleasure and opportunity to work with big community in a global nonprofit, Open Air Cloud. We are working together towards the goal of connecting the digital and physical world for the benefit of all. And we are actually super excited these days because we feel like we're in 1989 in CERN. We have this feeling that we're onto something very, very exciting, because we building on what we put into our state-of-the-art cloud report back from 2019, we have developed this platform concept that is intended for any type of real-world spatial computing, not just AR. And we are in the midst of detailing standards, protocols, setting up open source reference implementations for this. And the really cool part is that we are putting those things now into city-scale test beds, Bari, Italy, and Helsinki, Finland. So basically, it can be seen as a prototype of a potential open spatial web. So I couldn't be more excited.
Awesome. Awesome to have you, and thank you for joining us after midnight your time. Hopefully you can hang on for the rest of it. Finally, we have also a great representation from the big players, the big tech companies. He's a senior product manager for Google Maps and AR. You'll tell us more about this. Please welcome Justin Quimby.
Thanks, Ori. Great to be here. Thrilled to be on the panel. So my name is Justin Quimby, and as Ori mentioned, I lead the product efforts for Live View inside of Google Maps. And as far as the AR cloud connection goes, so Google Maps has been working for over 15 years to map the world and help users navigate, explore, and get things done in the real world. And Live View is just an extension of that. And as was mentioned, this idea of geospatial data. And really, we see Live View and AR as a way to extend the data that we've already got in Google Maps and help people connect to that data in a more intuitive fashion, as opposed to having to go through the kind of allocentric representation on a map and trying to figure out, like, hey, where does this dot relative to me? Instead, simply overlay that information on a camera screen and let people see where that information is in the real world. And we're thrilled to be working on this, and I can't wait to see what the future holds, because we've got a lot of exciting stuff in store.
Thanks a lot, Quimby, Justin. And myself, I'm Orion Barr, as mentioned before, founder of AWE and Super Ventures, and had the opportunity to coin the term when everything started to brew around the world. And I've been obviously following it since then, wrote a few posts, which are still read by many people. And really glad to see that, you know, things have actually evolved, maybe not as quick as we wanted, because it's never the case, but it's pretty awesome, like we hear from everybody here. All right, so by the way, if you have questions, I would ask to wait a little bit before you send it to people on the chat until we kind of go through some of the major questions that we have prepared for the panel, but I promise that we'll try to answer all these questions. All right, so back to the slides. I want to start with kind of an issue, which is terms. Terms are always problematic. You know, there are lots of terms. Everyone likes a different term, and that creates a lot of confusion initially when a new thing comes to the market. I don't want to get into a whole debate around terms, but I do want to hear from each one of you on the panel. And by the way, for those who have joined the meetup, you can put your answers in the chat. The question is, what do you think will be the prevailing term to describe what we're talking about here today in the future? Here on the slide, you see some of those names, some defined before we even talked about the air cloud, some after. We have, you know, metaverse from Snow Crash, which some people refer to it as such, and kind of the favorite term for each one of the big players. So once again, let's start from Matt. What's your favorite term? You're on mute still, sorry.
I'm not really objective on this one, so I'm definitely going to say AR cloud. But I think that when you, like, we're seeing digital twin or mirror world, kind of, I see those terms get used a lot to sort of descriptively describe this idea. But in time, I think it's just going to be a term like database. You know, like if you're using Snapchat on obviously there's a big database up there in the cloud managing all this stuff, and no one ever talks about it. No one cares, what it is. It's just something under the covers that only the the DevOps teams really care about. And my hope, my belief is that all these sort of terms like AR cloud will eventually be treated like terms like database, and it'll just be sort of invisible and never talked about, and all we'll really talk about is the amazing sort of experiences that we all enjoy that are powered by the AR cloud.
So we have one for the AR cloud. It's really meant to be just a one-word answer.
Okay.
But anyway, Matt.
Okay.
So Justin, what's your?
Yeah, well, I think I agree. I think AR cloud is going to be the common language we use to describe this broader thing for a while. And then over time we might shift, but I think AR cloud for quite a while.
Kavya?
So if I wasn't coming from cloud computing era, I would pick AR cloud. It seems to be prevalent, but my favorite still is Mirror World.
Okay, cool. We have one for Mirror World, two for AR cloud. And Jan-Erik, I hear you say a lot the spatial web to describe the AR cloud.
Yeah, and that's because I like the open web. And even though, I sort of hedge my bet with my own personal thing, Superverse, like all bets are off. We have no idea what real people outside of this industry is going to call it. But I think AR cloud, it's a very to the point kind of term that people inside the industry understands, but maybe something like the spatial web or a mirror world, those kinds of terms might reach the minds of a bigger audience. And I've started to say the open spatial web, thinking that it's not just some sort of proprietary spatial web, but there's this bigger opportunity to create something that is very much inspired by standards, protocols, doing things based on the history of the scalability and flexibility of that type of platform.
Awesome, thank you, Jan-Erik. I see some people writing spatial web, ubiquitous computing, the matrix, macroverse, the oasis with a smiley, and lots of things. We'll leave it at that. For now, I think we have the majority to continue using the AR cloud, at least for this meetup. So let's move on. So the real question is how has the tech matured? And there's already a hint in the question, how far is it? Meaning that we're not totally there yet, obviously. So to that end, again, I want to start with Matt. How do you what's your perspective on how far are we with kind of getting the tech to be more mature and ready for prime time?
I think that it has matured. Like I think that the AR cloud isn't just a single mono thing. It's layers upon layers that are building up, and the bottom layer is always going to be persistence or relocalization, visual positioning service, and that is at the point now where it's deployed in production from multiple companies. Google's cloud positioning. Justin's working on using Google's visual positioning service. Microsoft have got their Azure cloud anchors, which are used in their Minecraft consumer app. Niantic has got the same sort of thing going on with Pokemon and Ingress for visual positioning. So I think although it's not being used by everyone everywhere, that bottom layer is definitely mature enough that it's being used in like production consumer apps by AAA consumer technology companies. And to me, that means it's certainly crossed a threshold of maturity, even though there's so much more stuff that still has to be built out that's still science fiction.
So what are the things that are still completely missing or very early?
Well, then on top of persistence and localization, there's the whole idea of doing sharing and multiplayer and occlusion and sort of physics with the real world. I think we've seen like demos of that in beta releases of iOS, and Google's got a depth API to enable it. So that stuff's kind of at the prototype stage. Then beyond that, start getting into more of a semantic understanding of the world. Like, oh, that's a tree, that's a Honda, you know, all this type of ability to actually start to understand what the world is. And that's really, really early. You know, that's still pretty much in labs, you know, or tech demos and that sort of stuff. But once you start getting into that world, there's an infinite number of ways that you could potentially understand the world. And for the systems to be able to support that, there's decades of work ahead.
Thank you for that. Next, we'll ask Justin from the view from within the beast about how this technology has matured or not. What's your take?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting to Matt's point, that what we're talking about is actually a multiple layers of a stack. And for us, it started out with Street View, actually, and all of the data and imagery that we've been collecting over the last 10, 15 years to help map the world. And from that, and that's 93 countries and trillions of bits of data to help position and localize devices. And, you know, we started out with, I had to go get my old Tango phone, right? 4 years ago, this was state of the art from Google, that Tango phone. And now today we have a wide availability on ARCore and ARKit devices as a platform for consumers to be able to experience these. And localization technologies have improved. ML models are improving monthly, it seems. And then there are some great progressions and advances in open source, as well as other proprietary software out there. And on top of that, we also have applications and real world applications using this. Google Maps, we've seen great adoption of live view and navigation. You know, it's what we're 23 minutes in, and you know, have to mention Pokemon Go, huge success in terms of introducing the concept of AR to a lot of folks. It's great to see that success. And I think that there is, over time, we are going to see each layer of the stack, from imagery to localization to understanding of the world to consumer applications to developer surface areas and business capability built on top of that. We're going to see growth and improvement across every layer of the stack moving forward. But I think today we actually have now a solid foundation on top of which to build some really accelerating use cases and businesses on top of the AR cloud.
Cool. So you mentioned the Google Maps live view, which we'll definitely get back to. I'm curious to hear more about the adoption because all I can see is how it works, which I love. Jan-Erik, you wanna comment quickly on how mature is the tech, or how far is it?
Well, it seems in many ways that the tech is more mature than the adoption in the marketplace. And there could be any number of that. So one of the reasons might be that the ecosystem is very fractured. There's no like whole platform you can deploy to. It's you deploy to this platform, that platform, and you reach a limited section of the market. So that is one issue. And maybe there's also this trust issue that the big players, they are describing very well, like Facebook, they described very well the tech stack in their recent conference, Connect, where they visualized the different aspects of the technology stacks. But they didn't talk too much, except from Project Aria, that they are doing they say they are being very careful with that private sensitive data. They claim that, so let's hope they live up to that. But for the AR cloud-like platform that they are presenting and other companies are presenting, we are a little bit in the dark on how they're going to handle personal data, how they're going to allow people to have control. And another thing, you know, the emergence of these proprietary ecosystems are limiting the scope of business models you can run within each of those different platforms. It's very different from the web, that you can do like everything that is legal on the web. But when you're doing something in a particular ecosystem that is run by a corporation, you have to sort of comply with their practices and within their business model. I think that also limits how this can scale. And of course, there are a lot of things in the technology stack that is very early. we could work on those things for decades to improve them every year until we have this really the kind of future we dream about that looks more like the science fiction films we've been inspired by.
All right, thank you, Jan-Erik. To that end, I want to show you a few things, and I also see a question kind of to dig more into the definition of what it is, what has matured per the question. So first, this is the definition of the by Deloitte of what they call the spatial web. And predominantly you see the physical, the digital, and the spatial layer, spatial interaction layers. I think that's something we all agree. The question is really what's in it, what's required to run it. Here's the magic verse spatial application layers. Similar idea. Of course, they try to make the point that it's going to be applicable for a lot of industries, and each one will have its own thing. And this is from Reality Labs, what you just mentioned, their definition, trying to break it more into the themes or the semantic layers themselves, with the semantics, the object, instances, dynamics, content, and so on. So I think we still have a lot of people kind of looking at it in different ways in terms of the details, but overall, I think there's pretty good understanding. The way we describe it so far is it. Okay, we're moving to the next question, which is really exciting to discuss, and that is how has the landscape changed, especially when it comes to big players versus small players, when it comes to is there really room for independent for startups to take over and really kind of create have a huge impact in this field, or is it something that really belongs to the big players? So just to remind you, this was kind of the landscape back in 2017, and where a lot of startups also joined this domain since then. But here you have three of the leading companies at the time that were since acquired by the big players. And still you have a bunch of them that are still independent, kind of still trying to make their mark. And this was the kind of the lay of the land for the big players. You had Microsoft, Google, and Apple in the lead, and a bunch of wildcard or contenders that were vying for that spot as well. Since then, we've seen Facebook and Snapchat step up significantly in terms of their communication, in terms of actually what they're developing. And we also have Niantic, which wasn't even on this chart at the time, which since then made very clear that they intend to build a platform for the AR cloud, made acquisitions, developed a lot of things, showed demos. So they're definitely a big player here. So with that said, let me again turn the question to the panel on how you see the landscape change since then, and how do you see the dynamics between big players and startups? Is there room for startups? What can they do in this new landscape? And we'll start again with Matt.
Yeah, look, my view is that if you're a AR cloud startup, you should stop. I don't think there's an opportunity to be an AR cloud startup that then becomes a big company. I think there's a lot of problems to be solved still in AR cloud. I think as a startup, you can pick one of those point problems and solve it. But your best case outcome is almost certainly just going to be selling your team to one of those big companies. I think the opportunity for a startup to sort of beat Google or Facebook at this as the window's shut, just because all those companies now have realized a couple of years ago how important this is. They've all really started investing heavily, and they all have teams of many tens of people already. It's just engineering teams building this stuff out. And you might be able to solve the technology problem, but you just won't get the distribution of your platform out to lots of developers unless you somehow also have a hit application on top of it, such as Niantic has. We talk about Niantic as a big player. I think their last public valuation was rumored to be in the like $4 or $5 billion. Consider like Snap, this little one, and they're like 10 times as big as Niantic, and their valuation somewhere like 30 or 40 billion. And Facebook and Apple and stuff are 20 times bigger than Snap. So I think if you are a startup, you really should be thinking about what would you build on top of the AR cloud. Assume that it's coming and look at really what services are publicly available today, from those big platforms, and how can you take advantage of those and sort of build a product, on top of the AR cloud that could get big traction as these platforms really, take off. Sort of ride the investment that Google's making.
I guess it's the old adage that, when you have the big players jumping into a field, startups need to look at ways to innovate on top of it. In a way, the AR cloud was exactly like that, because when that first post was published in 2017, it's exactly the month where AR became sort of mainstream for developers, with AR Core, ARKit, and hundreds of thousands or millions of developers kind of jumping on this and making it more and more ubiquitous. So then the startups say, okay, what can we do now? We'll create a layer on top of it, or look at it maybe underneath, that will take it to the next level, that will make it even more adoptable. And that's where the AR cloud came. And now that the big players are adopting AR cloud, you need to look for ways to innovate on top of it. So again, Justin, from the view within Google, how do you see kind of that dynamic between the big players and the small players when it comes to the AR cloud?
Yeah, well, I think it's very clear that over the last 3 years, we've gone from the early theories about AR, location-based AR and the AR cloud, to early stage adoption, early stage build-outs of these larger platforms. And I mean, we've moved from requiring dedicated hardware from structure IO sensors or Tango phones to a broad base of consumer devices that now have access to these capabilities. And I think that whenever you have a new space, a nascent space, that there are going to be big players who occupy portions of that ecosystem. And perhaps I'm a little bit more optimistic than Matt is, but I think that there are plenty of opportunities in this field for startups to solve specific problems incredibly well. I do agree with Matt that the consumer surface area, how do you get adoption for your product, is always a critical challenge as when you're a startup. I've been a member of several startups that completely imploded because we didn't get that product market fit. And so I think there's a big challenge there in getting consumer adoption for new products. And I think that's the question is, I think we've all seen AR, which is great, quote unquote, conference wear. It's great on the show floor. You get a 5-minute demo and you're like, this is amazing. But there's no stickiness there. There's not something that people will come back to once a month, once a week, once a day. And I think that's a challenge of identifying those problem areas, rather than having the hammer and looking for everything looks like a nail. What are the problems that AR actually and AR cloud actually solve for users, for consumers and businesses? And I think that's where there's huge opportunities still across the board. I mean, I think Snap's done a fantastic job in realizing the value of not location-based AR, but just augmenting people's faces. And they are seeing great adoption of AR in that regard. We've seen really nice adoption for live view for AR walking navigation, and we just recently launched the ability to calibrate your compass just using live view to help you fix that blue dot, and a number of other things that are be kind of coming out soon. So we're really rosy about the future of AR, and we're really excited about where it's going. I think as in any nascent space market, you're going to have players who build systems and technologies. Some of them will work and some of them won't. And we're still in the early days. I don't want to call it the Wild West, but this is absolutely there's a lot of prospecting going on. and sometimes you hit oil and sometimes you don't. So I think that, yeah, we're really excited about the future, and it's great to see all the folks who are building new pieces of technology on top of the various systems.
Thank you, Justin. I want to hear more from the panel on this, but we have to move on. A lot of questions to cover. So next question is around use cases. So what is this thing really good for? And what have we learned? I mean, we made some assumptions 3 years ago. Startups over the time made assumptions, but I think we learned a lot. And I want to hear from you guys, kind of, what have we learned? What are the most requested use cases? What are some that are, at least at this point, not seeing a lot of need? And here, you know, kind of a sample of some of the use cases, the big ones, you know, around indoor and outdoor navigation and travel. Of course, you know, for social and games, retail and grocery shopping are considered big, but there's a lot of other things around insurance estimations and real estate sales, home sharing, onboarding, that's, you know, the Airbnb style manual. Home renovation is a big one, advertising. We even have a company that focuses on AirCloud for finding where scooters are moving around the city, things around emergency response and safety. For me, it's still one of the biggest use cases, which I'm still not seeing being implemented, is around learning and just sharing knowledge, what I kind of call the spatial Wikipedia, where everywhere you go, with a glance, you can get access to humanity's information or knowledge without even need to search or click. And it's right there, and it's visual, and it's interactive and intuitive. So let's hear from the panel. And now we'll start with Jan-Erik. Yeah. Where do you see kind of the biggest request for use cases for the AirCloud?
Well, I think that question is posed now at a time that is very similar to 1992 for the web. You know, there's a few geeks, and they are perfectly happy, those geeks, to dream about the potential of text pages with URLs in them. But most people, they have no idea about it. Even people who are pretty tech savvy, they might have heard about Pokemon Go, which isn't really an AR game. It's a GPS game. Basically, you turn off the AR feature. It has nothing to do with AR, only that you can like occasionally try and view your Pokemons in there. And the other kind of AR that people are using isn't AR Cloud. It's face kind of things. You use the lens, and so people have no idea, and they don't know what they want yet. And we, as an industry, we might not know where the biggest impacts will be. So there will be some people will get some early ideas before someone else, and we will have massive business model innovations around that can't come out of the blue. Nobody predicted, nobody knew. That is sort of what I think will happen. And that's why I'm a little bit in objection to Matt. He's, of course, it's the like point technical solutions, like his company was one example of that. You will see that will be acquired typically by those large players at the state of the industry. Not really healthy for the ecosystem though, if you were using 60 SDKs. So when is that technology coming back to the developers from Niantic? We don't know. So for me, I think it's a little bit like AR in general right now. I think we might see some AR cloud technology use cases that are more enterprise, that has really like an obvious.
Jan-Erik, I mean, I know that, you know, as part of the Open Air Cloud organization, you've been working with some potential companies, organizations to start implementing test beds and stuff. So where do you see kind of that pool, people that are asking, except for, you know, those geeks, right?
Yeah, there's focus on the construction industry, BIM, and you have tourism, you have travel, navigation, you have some. So there are things that are being coming to the surface, but we don't know how big they will be. in general, this is like a universal technology for everything in your life. Basically, you're operating the physical world, and you bring the entirety of the digital life out of the screens and into the real world, and anything can happen from that.
Okay, Kavya, how about you? What are you seeing? You have a kind of a different filter to look at things?
I know I have a completely sort of an outside perspective, but at the same time, when I look at it from an outside perspective, I also go a little bit more deeper, being a technologist, to try to understand where could all this go. So if I had not attended Facebook Connect this year, or that had not taken place, I would probably agree with Jean-Eric. But because we have seen some kind of writing on the wall through Facebook Connect and their introduction of ARIA project, I feel like, especially post-COVID world, what I foresee is this technology is going to allow us to visit, like, for example, my parents in India, and be able to be together and yet be alone. And you can thread it into work, you can thread it into social interaction, you can thread it into training, all of that. But I think this idea of ability to be together and yet be apart is remarkable. And I think that's going to be that's going to determine how it kind of like, goes further down into these use cases. But social aspect, I would say, is the most exciting for someone like myself. And it's scary too, because then it brings all kinds of problems along.
Yeah.
Can you make some asparagus or broccoli in the fridge?
That's someone that cannot be muted for some reason. Folks, if you can mute your computer, that'd be great. So Justin, what can you tell us about the leading use cases that you're seeing, as well as what you're thinking about to go for as part of Google?
Yeah, so being part of Google Maps, that we see AR as kind of supercharging many of the 2D map use cases that we all know and love. Navigation, exploration, and then taking action, getting things done in the world. And in many ways, that is sort of the immediate, obvious first step. But one of the key things for us is we want to deploy those kind of capabilities at global scale. And so that's where we've spent a lot of time with Live View to try to make sure that Live View works everywhere where you have Street View imagery and you want to get navigation instructions. Navigation was our first use case, and we've seen great adoption there. We were really happy with the numbers. And we started to expand there to say, what else can AR be used for? What else can Live View be used for in the Maps context? And that's where you start to look at things like, okay, orientation and distance. So often when you are navigating or looking at a map, you don't need detailed turn-by-turn directions. You simply need to know which direction is this place and roughly how far is it from me. And so that we've started to implement that to make it very easy for users to glance at their phone and then start walking in that direction, or just get a sense of which direction is New York City or Mexico City or whatever location you picked on your map. I think the other interesting thing is that there's been a lot of really interesting work done by some other companies in the enterprise space, and the combination of AR Cloud with other existing technology stacks. So obviously Snap's been mentioned, but when we talk about places like Phantasmo for their ability of identifying where scooters are, Dent Realty has been doing some really interesting work with previewing construction sites and other commercial real estate. And then Skydio has integrated some location-based AR for how you can then pilot their drones to provide mapping of bridges and other structures. And I think that there's some really interesting use cases in the enterprise space for being able to collect data in a repeatable fashion and then see the environment change over time, which has some great implications for agriculture, construction, and other large-scale infrastructure projects. I think for Google, as Google looks at AR as a whole, we always are looking for how can we change and help lots of people's lives. So Directions was a first step, and we'll have some announcements coming soon on some exciting new stuff. I think to the point about remote presence, I think the other thing that here is really mentioned thus far, but I think is really important, is that there are going to be a huge difference in terms of the AR Cloud use cases for the phone versus when there are commercially available headsets at scale that provide AR cloud functionality. I think we will see a bifurcation in the space of phone-based use cases and then those for headsets. And right now, the phone is the platform. It's not going away anytime soon. And so that's where the majority of effort and research is on AR cloud, I see across the industry. However, I think we all have read those novels, and we saw them in the suggestions for alternative names, that I think we can all see ahead, to Jan-Erik's point about, like, we can see the potential of the AR cloud with these headsets down the road, but it's going to be a long time before we get there. And so I think that it's going to be a really interesting thing of what's valuable today on the phone versus what's potentially possible X years in the future for headsets. But who knows when they will actually get here.
Thank you, Justin. So Matt, you've been thinking a lot about use cases, especially part of 6D, kind of looking for revenue, for partners, for people to use it. What have you learned in those 3 years?
Yeah, you're right. Since the beginning, we've really come at this from like the use cases and sort of backed into the common technology layer, which is what we built. I think everything on your list is a good use cases. They're all appropriate, natural fits for the stuff that the AR cloud enables. So I'll tell them what wrong. Like, we had a lot of stuff right at 6D, but there were two things I think we really got wrong. And one of those was, we thought that AR mattered, and it really doesn't. What matters is the data today. I think that the more we spoke to companies like Airbnb about onboarding, about insurance companies, about all the enterprise use cases in particular, they cared much more about having a 3D representation of reality that was a data set, and what knowledge could they extract from that 3D data set, whether it was a floor plan or an inventory of what was in that property, or how it changed over time as the construction went on. And the AR piece just didn't matter at all to those use cases. So that was that was kind of a bit of a shock to us, because it wasn't what our belief system when we started the company sort of led us there, but that was certainly what we learned.
Really the digital twin part of the whole story, right?
Yeah. I mean, everyone sort of, there's like a cliche use case for Airbnb, which is like, oh, I go to an Airbnb and I can, hold my phone up and look around, or tell me how to unlock the door and how to use the dishwasher and all that sort of, overlay, on top of the house. But Airbnb were like, no, that's just a gimmick. No one cares about that. We actually need the square footage of the place. So we need to know if it's compliant for wheelchairs and ADA, certification. So we need
you have a box.
Always. And so the data itself was the most important thing for the use cases. The other thing that we were wrong about is, we thought developers were the right target. That once developers kind of understood that here's a use case opportunity and here's the enabling technology, that they'd be able to build it. We really learned that you need to go far, far deeper into the use cases. And if you want to build an application for insurance that uses AR cloud type stuff, you actually need to forget about the AR cloud and think, look, what does the insurance industry actually need, and can simplify it, and then just bolt on the bits of AR cloud or AR or computer vision or whatever that support it. And so all of those use cases I think that you listed, I wouldn't come at them today thinking of them as AR cloud use cases. I just think of them, that's the problem, how do I solve it? And maybe the AR cloud can help in some ways. But you really need to go far, far deeper and build like the whole solution for that use case. So trying to build something that's horizontal, didn't work out. So those are the two things that we came across. The last point, I guess, completely agree with Jan-Erik in that I think the consumer use cases that take off, that leverage the AR cloud, we don't know what they're going to be. Like it'll be something completely new, something completely native to the fact that we now have all this data, and someone will discover something crazy and it'll just take off consumer-wise. And then to Kavya's point, I definitely think that, we talk about enterprise, we talk about like entertainment and all these types of things. But if you look at us as humans and what do we, care about almost more than anything else, it's communicating with each other. And if AR cloud or AR, technologies can let us communicate in a slightly better way than is possible with any other sort of technology or medium, then that is going to be massive. And I don't really think anyone's figured that out yet, but whoever figures out how AR can drive communication, that will be far more successful than anything in enterprise or entertainment or gaming or anything like that.
Thank you, Matt. A little controversial, but I guess that's reality. So we're learning. All right, we're moving on to the next question, although we can spend a whole day easily on use cases for the AR cloud. The next question is around privacy and security. And here, first I want to show you this face, which I've been using since basically 2017 as a good way to make sure we never forget this. The idea that the amount of data collected about us by corporations is only going to grow with the AR cloud when everything we do is captured and analyzed on camera. So, privacy and security since the very first day were considered huge concerns. And I wanted to kind of have a checkpoint today and have Kavya mostly refer to where you think we are today in terms of, first of all, understanding the need to address privacy and security with the AR cloud, who's actually doing good work there, where it's going, and what else can you do? So Kavya, this is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me of that face. I clearly remember. So I didn't mention during my intro, but I was also working for Facebook during 2016 election time, doing third-party security, though I was not anyhow involved in the Cambridge Analytica stuff. But my job there was to build a scalable model to assess third parties that come through the front door. Anyhow, with that experience and some of the experience from being head of security at Linden Lab, the oldest virtual world maker, Second Life that all know, I started this XRSI. Now we're talking about AR Cloud. In past few years, I've seen at least 3 or 4 school of thoughts, or call it like a trends. So the first trend is that regulation, or just the school of thought, is that regulations are going to somehow answer privacy. And some even claim that regulations are already there. Like, they rely on GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, or CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Regulation, but it is not really true. Maybe for some specific use case, like giving EU data subjects personal data rights, that's true. But for AR Cloud, we really truly don't quite understand. And no matter how we skin this, regulations alone cannot be the answer. I had this validated with, you guys probably know Sophia Batchelor. She is a brain-computer interface and neuroscientist, and fairly recently she was speaking with me on a podcast, which is part of XRSI's awareness campaign. It's called Singularity Watch. The first episode, as I was discussing the very thing with her, she said regulations alone can't solve it. We have to have a governance model. So regulations come from the outside. What we need in the meantime is, and regulations can actually stifle innovation. I'm actually not all the way for regulation. What we really need is a governance model, so that, and this sort of a mindset shift for privacy. So what these tools potentially, so that we could, bake privacy into design. And while we are collecting data, we could think about data protection, because like Matt said, it is really about the data. And we are collecting ton of it. The second school of thought is, it's very obvious. Many of these emerging technologies encountered the thing which we call like the Collingridge problem. It's hard to predict the impact of technology unless you have extensively developed it and widely adopted it. So we can't really go too deep into these privacy concerns until we have enough data. And that's the another school of thought is like people are sort of afraid to even have this conversation and sometimes even acknowledge big tech firms. They do acknowledge it, but like we saw with the face, it's more about the PR. More about like, let's look good, talk about privacy because, you know, privacy is a human right. But when it comes to the reality check, things are quite different. Then there is another school of thought where people say, oh, well, you know, these technologies are going to doom us. They're too dangerous. Let's just not touch them. In fact, sometimes people ask me, they're like, hey, are you against virtual reality and augmented? And I'm like, no, I'm actually the enabler of these technologies. My goal is to safely go there and not just move fast and break things. So finally, here is the promising, or what I call is the silver lining, is where we come into picture. Is one, XRSI bridges the gap between the regulatory people because oftentimes they don't understand technology, and that's why we get into these congressional hearings afterwards. So bridging the gap in understanding what should be regulated, what is good, what is bad, what is dangerous, and then when there is no regulation or no self-governance, how do we draw that line in the sand? So with that, I actually want to, if I may share my screen real quick, I want to talk about this recent work that we have put together, which is the XRSI's privacy framework. Well, the first point, privacy is a shared responsibility. So to me, when I look at OpenAI or AR Cloud, I feel like it's more like, you know, inviting somebody into my house. Do I have controls, gates, locks, all of this? But then even with that, do I want to bring a person into my living room, or I want to take that person into my bedroom? Do I give him access to the bathroom, or who is that person? All of this context is important. But even if a company gives you those controls, to exercise them is going to be upon us. So it kind of is a shared responsibility, and that's like the mindset change that we're trying to get at. Fairly recently, just about 8th of September at OpenAI Cloud Summit, we launched this privacy framework. So now we're beginning to get a language around and hopefully some adoption. In fact, Brad, the VP of Facebook, Assistant VP of Facebook Policy, had tweeted out in support of this framework. So this and plus a couple of governments have also engaged with us. So I'm seeing a lot of like, you know, sign of a potential adoption of this thing. What this framework does is it gives you a very simplified language. So if you are a developer and you don't know where to begin, what to think about privacy, think about, have you assessed, let me take to the next slide. So do you know what you have in your inventory? Have you considered the potential risk? And then, you know, next think about, if you are putting somebody at risk, or if you're expanding the scope of privacy, are you informing your constituents or your, you know, individuals that may be impacted, which may not be users? It is actually bystanders and other folks, children. So informing them. And then if you are going to put people at risk, if you're going to process, let's say, biometrically inferred data, gaze data, pose data, then make some special consideration to encrypt it, process it on device, things like that. So this is just a very, very, very high level overview. But, you know, if you could just do 4 things: assess your risk, inform people that you're putting them at risk, inform people how you're managing those risks, or, you know, build controls to manage, you know, deletion of data and that kind of stuff. And then another mindset shift that we're trying to do is prevention, because we're living in an era of seeing is no longer believing. All the deep fakes, the deep nudes and propaganda, and all of this thing is coming for us when it comes to AR. So we need to get in the mode of preventing harm rather than just protection, because we can do data security and all, but the deep fakes, you know, once you've seen something, you can't unsee things. And that's the other part, you know, Ori, this is why I said that, you know, we need to think about the potential stakeholders or the people as human versus users, because you may be using the technology, but you would still be impacted even if you're a bystander. So taking some of those core predefined privacy by design principle and try to build trust, infuse accessibility. So when you're giving privacy information, you really have to think about to allow enough time, closed captioning. Other people who have some kind of a disability, maybe they need to look at it differently. And then just thinking about it from various cultural perspective, other people that maybe, you know, not understand the same language, various translation and whatnot. So those are things that we worked on. Here is what I would like you guys to do, is to first think about privacy as a shared responsibility. If you're working on something, if you're a startup, developer, big tech firm, pay attention to this privacy framework. It is a very well thought through interdisciplinary work from various entities, including OpenAI Cloud, Georgia Tech University, University of Michigan, and many other people. So next 3 months is your time to potentially further develop these controls. It has about 125 controls. So you can develop further based on whatever technology you encounter, brain-computer interfaces or artificial intelligence, embodied AI development you encounter. How do we infuse that in this framework? And that's the quest that we are on. And then we'll release a 1.1 version of 1st of January. So may seem like a, you know, kind of a pitch or a spiel, but it is really necessary that we self-govern during this time, because regulations will arrive way too late. And even then, they will not be addressing things that we are baking into the products right now. So I think that's where we are, Ori, is we have a baseline now. And I urge the industry to really pay attention to every line item that we've outlined and get together, get involved, and help us, you know, build it further and refine what should go into this framework.
Thank you, Kavya, for putting together the framework and for doing what you do. Before we move on to the next question, who do you think out of the key players in the AR cloud specifically is doing the best job in terms of privacy and security?
Is that directed to me, Ori?
Yeah.
Okay, so who is doing the best job? You know, it's very, very tough to say, especially amongst the big player. One name. Well, can I say who is not doing a very good job?
That's fair too.
That's
Yeah.
like the easy answer. Well, that's the face that you put there. That is my biggest complaint, is people get on the biggest stage and they talk about future is private. Well, how? What about the present moment? All of the problems that come from the same source. So I think it's time that we refuse to just believe whatever is, you know, big captions. Let's see some actions. Let's see adoption of these things that we've outlined. At Facebook Connect, that Facebook put out responsible innovation principle. And I personally told them, I was like, people are gonna take a look at this and take a big yawn. So get some substance behind it. So I'm really rooting for, you know, adoption of these granular stuff. Who's doing a good job? I don't have enough data to actually make that statement.
Okay. Say who you think is doing a good job?
I think almost nobody. And the big elephant in the room is the dominant business model of our time. If you look at the top 10 CapEx or like market cap, they are all running almost the same business model. And that is very hard to gel with these ethical principles. And it's very understandable that these companies are continuing running on that, but I'm pursuing this, what could look like a naive pipe dream, that this business model is going to be massively disrupted. And there's some momentum building up towards that, and I hope it'll happen, or else I think we are going down dark road. I think we want better. We want a better future for ourselves and our children than that, what this business model delivers. I think the people running those corporations, working for those corporations, using their products, they are aware of this problem, and I think in their hearts they want to do something about it. But it's like an addiction to the current business model. until you solve that, until you revolutionize that thing, it's very hard. You can regulate, you can try and take shared responsibility, but it's might not amount to much. So there's this opportunity for a really interesting revolution.
The somber view from Jan Erik. Jan Erik, stay on the screen. Next question is for you. Folks, by the way, we're kind of running out of time, but hopefully you can stick around for a little bit more. We have a couple more questions, and I like the discussion so far. So want to continue? Yeah? All right. All right, next question. Is there support to make the air cloud open? And here, you know, I think it was well understood that there will be different types of air clouds and many different implementations, and each one will have kind of its own purpose. But from the beginning, I think it was pretty clear that we were concerned that it would be all created by one corporation or one organization. So there was this need for a unified air cloud theory that would allow openness and interoperability between the different technologies that are supporting this, you know, the air cloud. So, Jan Erik, what's the question is mostly for you. How do you see so far the progress of your work, and how people are kind of reacting to the idea or the need for openness and interoperability, and who's really doing a good job in that direction?
Well, in general, you know, we hear a lot of positive, supportive remarks, and we have the volunteer community in Open Air Cloud, and we are also what you see with XRSI as really great stuff going on there. But like if you imagine a big picture with pixels, and then the resources that has gone into this open platform compared to what is being invested in the proprietary platforms, it's like you have this one pixel there in a 4K image. So there's like huge disjoint between a small number of volunteers who are actively trying to make history and make a better future, and everything else that is far more funded. So that's we have our testbeds now. They are volunteered by our partners and our people who are writing code, working on standards protocols. But that kind of effort really would benefit from more engagement from the industry.
So besides engagement and awareness, which I totally agree, that's the first step. What are the kind of the key things to help us advance towards an open air cloud?
One thing that you need to realize that like you have different technologies that are fundamental, and today there are no standards and protocols for those. So they are not interoperable. With the XRSI privacy framework, we have something that is a very good structure for the working on the ethical side. Open Air Cloud is working on the tech stack, and we are committed to trying to research in our test beds the kind of building best practices, enabling that shared responsibility. So the great kudos to Augmented City and Immersal, who has put in resources towards setting up the test beds. That provides an opportunity. We are getting contacted by a lot of different people around the world who wants to have test beds in their cities. And with some more resources, that could definitely happen. We have to just make the first test beds really impactful and understand how we can do the R&D in those test beds in an effective way. But if we succeed in that R&D and we can demonstrate a platform concept that really works and that really scales and that you can run any number of high value use cases on, then people might get it, and people might want to have this open spatial web platform.
So let's ask the elephant in the room. Justin, what are you guys doing in order to, if at all, in order to make your contribution to the AirCloud more open and interoperable with other players, or are you seeing kind of yours as its own thing?
Well, I think the interesting thing when you talk about open for the AirCloud, we already have an open standard for content in the world, for location-based content, either ECTF or latitude, longitude, and altitude. Like, there exists an open standard today for anchoring content to things in the world. And so in that way, we've got a way to address content. I think, though, the crux of your question gets to the one of, well, what localization technologies are available? And for me, well, not for me, but I think for Google, we've had in the past, as part of Tango, there were some APIs that were available. We deprecated those systems. We haven't announced anything in terms of plans to open up VPS to external developers. But I think that there is going to be, across the board, when we talk about the various companies involved in the space, large companies and small companies, some are going to choose to keep their technologies to deliver value for their first-party applications. Others are going to go for a third-party developer approach. And thus far, Google is focused on making sure that Google Maps and Live View is the best thing to help the users using Live View. We're not trying to go immediately from zero to a broad-based third-party application layer inside of Google Maps. There's a lot of value still to be given to people just by taking what exists in the 2D map and then providing some AR on top of that to solutions to solve problems that people already have. I think this is going to be a really interesting space over the next few years, and who knows what the future brings for Google's AR cloud technology. But for now, we're committed to focusing on our first-party surface areas.
Justin, what can you tell us about the adoption of the Live View in Google Maps so far? Percentages or something, just to get us a sense, because most people I talk to are not aware of it.
Yeah, so I can't talk specific percentages, unfortunately, but we are quite happy with the adoption rates internally. And one of the things for AR is that we see it, and it's a bad pun, I apologize, but we see it as an augmentation to what exists already today in the base map and that 2D experience. And so for people who are in new environments or who may have less confidence in their navigation skills, for these people, Live View is incredibly helpful. And we see great numbers in terms of retention and repeat usage for people who use it, who are in new environments or may just need more help when they're navigating around. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't talk about specific numbers today, but hopefully tune in at I/O next year for some additional data there.
Do you see a day in the future where the Google Map, I guess the AirCloud platform for the Google Map will become open to other people? Because, from what I've seen so far, it probably works the best out of anything out there in terms of the coverage and the speed in which it recognizes your location. I've tried it in 4 out of 4 continents so far, and it worked great. So you see kind of sometime in the near future where it kind of, you open that amazing data and tech to other people?
I think unfortunately, I can't give you a specific answer. There are many possibilities. That is one of them. Who knows what the future holds? But thus far, we haven't made any public announcement about that.
So here's my suggestion. You can look at what OpenAirCloud is doing with the Open Geospatial Consortium, where you are a member. Google is a member of the Open Geospatial Consortium, and we're working on extending what you just mentioned with latitude, longitude, altitude. We want to just add orientation to that, and then we have what we call GeoPose, and I think that is could be sort of like the URL of the spatial web. It's a connecting thing. You could connect virtual objects to the real world at a real physical location, and it can provide some sort of facility to have a digital twin representation of a real world object in the digital world. So that is truly like a fundamental kind of standard that we hope that OGC will be able to publish a draft version of the spec in the pretty near future. So what you could do if you consider ever opening up your tech stack for third-party developers, support GeoPose for your visual positioning service.
All right. Hopefully Justin will take that to heart. Matt, it's kind of a transition to the next question, which is really about the future of the Air Cloud, but still on openness. I want to get your take on how do you see the landscape changing from an openness perspective? Do you see that we'll have, one or two companies that rule the world with their own, gardens for Air Clouds, or do you see as a chance for some interoperability and really delivering on this idea that all the Air Clouds could technically be connected using standards and guidance and so on?
Yeah, I think, Justin alluded to this before we talked about using the technologies that Google's developing to make, Google Maps better. And one thing I think, particularly as developers or smaller companies, it's really hard to grasp the scale of these big companies. And, Facebook has a billion users on Instagram. Snap has, I don't know how many 100 million. Pokemon Go has hundreds of millions. Google has, I don't know, 1 billion plus Maps or Android users. And when you've got that big of a, captive user base, you don't even really need to think, like you can justify building an entire AR cloud mapping solution just to serve Instagram. Like forget even other Facebook applications, let alone trying to expand it to bring on third parties. So I think for a long time to come, just the economics of improving, Pokemon Go by a few percent will justify, continued investment in a very tightly locked, AR cloud solution, the same as, Google Maps or driving a bit of Instagram engagement. So I think until we get sort of over that hump and these companies start looking for, okay, how do we now grow beyond our, our captive first party user base? Then we'll start to see these sort of, technologies being exposed to third parties to see what they come up with. Even then it's going to, oh, well, I'm going to build on Facebook's AR cloud, or I'm going to build on Google's AR cloud in terms of the technology stack. I think the other thing that, again, Justin alluded to is that at the content layer, like if I just want a bit of content, like I'm building an artistic, sculpture that I want to put in the middle of Times Square, even today, I could build my application to call, I could just see what type of phone you're using, and I call Apple's ARKit anchors, or I call Azure's cloud anchors, or Google's cloud anchors, and that could all be hidden from the user. And from the content's point of view, it looks like it works, on all different devices, and it looks, cross-platform. In terms of, really having like an open AR cloud, data models and points of interest, I think that's about as likely as me opening Apple Maps on my phone for driving directions and getting all of Google's POI data overlaid on top of that map. That's not going to happen, or vice versa. And there'll always be, quite big silos there that as a developer, you're going to have to select, which stack you leverage your application on top of.
All right. Thank you for that. That leads us to, I think, our final main question for today. And we're going to include some of the questions from the audience here. But it's really what's next for the Air Cloud. And, we mentioned back in 2017 a few things that could accelerate or stall the Air Cloud. You have here a list of things that were considered. And so when you answer this question, say what do you think is the next step for the Air Cloud, and what are the things that will accelerate it or help it become successful? And let's actually start with a question from the audience, which is, what's going to be the next big Air Cloud hit? And I think the question is more in terms of consumers, kind of comparing it to some of the games out there, like Minecraft and so on, which didn't really, at least until now, been successful so far. So
I'll jump
yeah,
on
so
that.
what's next for the Air Cloud? Who wants to start?
It's definitely going to be, you know, seeing 60s technology inside Pokemon Go. That is going to, I mean, I'm joking, but I actually do believe that. You know, Pokemon's got a massive user base. It's a consumer product. And, you know, there's great technology that will be built in. It won't be a new game or a new product or a new thing. It'll be taking something where there is an already, you know, compelling or sort of captive, active user base and adding AR Cloud capabilities to make the experience of that product better.
Okay.
I have a take, and that is back in the day, EV, electric vehicles, they were for those who took one for the team, who didn't care about how the car looked, what sort of range it had, what sort of performance. You were sort of an idealist. Then there was this Tesla Roadster moment, and yeah, I have some ideas, and actually I have my day job now, and I'm building a small team on my spare time, so that maybe I'll replace my day job with something that will work towards a Tesla Roadster moment for Air Cloud technologies. And one little hint there is 5G and cloud rendering.
Okay, I guess we'll
Yeah,
have to settle for that.
I think one interesting thing is that we really haven't talked about is the impact of COVID-19 on usage and adoption of AR Cloud capabilities. In many cases this year, products have suffered significantly because people aren't going out, people aren't traveling nearly as much as they used to. The Pokemon Go Fest underwent some significant changes. Minecraft Earth actually fundamentally changed the way in which the application works because they did not want to be pushing people out into the world to gather in parks together. And so I think one of the interesting things will be for the AR Cloud and applications that are location-based is what happens when people are actually able to go out and safely gather again. And when companies and individuals feel good about building things that bring people together. And so that Tesla moment might be in who knows how long, when we have a vaccine that is universally distributed, that people are actually able to go out and some form of capability that allows people to connect with the other people and reconnect, I think could be an incredible moment. And I'm really excited and optimistic about what happens at that point. So I think to Matt's point, you know, bringing people together is, and the human desire to communicate is so foundational and fundamental. And so if the AR Cloud can help do that in some way, that could be absolutely massive.
All right, I'm going to have another question about the future to our panelists, and that is, out of the key players out there, who do you think will rule the AR Cloud in, let's say, 2-3 years?
Well, I'll say that I don't think any one company will rule the AR Cloud. I think that there are too many major players, and as Matt mentioned, there are a number of very large organizations that want to have surface areas to improve their first-party applications. So I don't think you will see one AR Cloud to rule them all, especially at the localization and underlying data level. But who knows in terms of, and I could see a world in which most content is openly addressable. However, the underlying technology stacks might be siloed.
There is one name that almost never gets mentioned, but I am now inclined to throw that in there with the, you know, the ring spinning drone, Amazon. And Amazon never really gets too mentioned when it comes to AR Cloud, but I feel like there is this whole potential building with all these spying in our houses that they could really be working on, or maybe come up with something similar that you just don't know, they'll surprise you. There's definitely money and potential building.
They'll do an Amazon on us again. Matt,
okay.
who is it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree with Justin, you know, in terms of for quite some time, there'll be multiple clouds powering applications. But I think the ultimate winner, like whoever owns it, you know, for want of a better word, is going to be driven by application developers. And whoever is going to come up with the killer application, you know, I hate that term, but you know, I think the application is going to drive the consolidation of the back end. In the same way that Google came up with search, you know, and sort of led them to dominate the web. Facebook came up with, you know, the news feed and led to dominate the social graph. You know, someone will come up with an application that takes advantage of AR cloud stuff. And if that application becomes like the next dominant application that a billion plus people in the world use, then that application will probably lead to that company dominating the AR cloud backend. I wish I knew what it was, but you know, someone will build that, and I think there's a pretty, you know, history as a guide would probably indicate that it is going to be someone new that isn't one of the big platforms that becomes one of those big, you know, big titans, and they're probably going to do it by doing something that the incumbent business models, you know, can't do. So in the same way that Snap succeeded against Facebook by throwing away all the data, making, you know, just say, we don't keep it, we don't care. You know, Facebook was like, well, we can't even do that. So it gave, you know, Snap such a huge, you know, opportunity to build a massive business. I think someone in the XR space is going to come up with, look, we've got a business model that advertising-based companies can't do, or hardware companies can't do, and they'll be able to become quite big, you know, before those companies can really, you know, focus on it.
Thank you, Matt. We're clocking almost an hour and a half, and we addressed a few questions from the chat, but let's give people, like whoever is really adamant about getting an answer to their question.
For one day I wasn't.
Okay, thank you, Sam. You have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, now with all this sort of, you know, Facebook ads and all that, I was marking this in the chat. How are we going to avoid the sort of issues that have been brought up about data and data coverage as it relates to advertising, and that everybody's sort of blaming advertising for the downfall of social media? How can we avoid that when it comes to the AR cloud? I know it's not a simple answer, but I just didn't know if there was some kind of way to, sorry for all the like family noise in the background, but how do we avoid it?
It's a family meetup, that's fine. So we have time for one answer. So who wants to take that one from the panel?
Pay for the product, don't have it for free, and watch ads.
Build trust, I would say. Anyone you are, you're a big tech, you're a small person, you're me, you're Sam, you're Jarek, build trust. That's what the success will depend on after you've like kind of, you know, made your millions and billions. If over the years, the people who are most trustworthy will continue to flourish.
Well spoken.
Question
The infinite minds.
Ben, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi everybody. One thing that I haven't heard spoken about here that has implications for the cloud and implications for privacy, two of the biggest discussions here, is the forthcoming WebXR device API module for AR. And as we know right now, most of the AR apps are built on ARKit or ARCore for phones, and this is coming for glasses. So I see that as coming as a big disruptor to this. So to Jan-Erik and Kavya, which by the way, bravo for both the things that you guys said tonight. What do you see the implications for the open cloud and privacy with the WebXR device API, and how is that going to be disruptive?
Actually, I was in a meeting with people from W3C earlier this day. It was workshop where we.
I missed that.
Yeah. And yeah, there was one of the people who are working on the WebXR platform and also into this sensor aspect. So I'm really happy to see that, like from the web standards development, they are deeply committed to this having users understand what sort of security context they are in. So they are looking into ways to inform the user so they have informed consent on giving access to sensors. So the mindset is definitely there. So we're now like trying to merge from our different worlds because they are very close to the metal in WebXR, and we're on the infrastructure interoperability layer to have the data flowing around in the infrastructure. So we can find those points of connection, and as long as we are working from this kind of shared mindset that we want to protect people's personal data, then not only the ones who are users, but also the citizens and individuals in the sensor range of those devices.
Thank you, Jan. Folks, this is all the time we had for today. There were a lot of great questions in the chat, and I promise you to go over that and try to provide answers in some form. This is recorded, so it will be available online for those who missed it. Really want to thank all the participants who stuck till the end for an hour and a half. And above all, I want to have kind of big round of applause for our amazing panel here today. Give it up. Any parting words for any of the panelists? Matt, Kavya, Jan-Erik, Justin.
No, I just reiterate, Ori, I think I said this before we joined, but I think your willingness, as you champion this term, to not sort of try and own it too tightly, but to let the idea of the AR cloud, go and take root in whatever form people sort of imagined it, has definitely, really helped people understand it, grow with it, adopt it, and it's been I think the sort of pivotal moment of something that we'll look back on in 20 years and say this is where it began.
Cool, thank you. That's the only way you can do it. Anyone else? Parting words?
Yes, Ori, I would like to say first of all, thank you for putting privacy into this mix. And I hope that we continue this, privacy conversation forever and ever, wherever these conversations are taking place. But I want to say to everyone, we have 1 year probably before the gloves come off and all this data collection comes to fruition, maybe 1.5 year. Now is the time to get involved with these efforts where privacy conversations are happening, ethics conversations are happening. Samantha, bravo for thinking through about, what about privacy and advertising? Because we need these things, but at the same time, how do we think it through? So I encourage everybody to now, really buckle up, get together, get involved, and start really making an impact in this field.
Justin, you're nodding.
Well, I agree that I think this is a critical conversation to be having for both privacy and usage of technology and the data sets. And I'm really glad to hear that there are more and more folks who are really interested in this and are pushing the ball forward on it. And I want to say again, also thank you, Ori, for organizing this. You've been a relentless supporter of AR throughout the years, and really appreciate all the effort and community building you've been doing. Because ultimately, as I'm not sure if we're in it's 92 or 84 or what year it is for the technology, but it is the community that really helps bring great ideas to fruition, and it's where some really innovative stuff is going to come from. So thank you for everyone who's been attending, and Ori for keeping the ball going and this thing going for 3 or 4 years.
I think regardless of the year, we should party like it's 1999. Thank you all for joining. Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you, Ori. Thank you, Kavya.
Be followed up. Bye-bye.
Live long and
all.
prosper.
Thank you.
you.